against Tony Ferguson and Conor McGregor on the heels of this performance. Now, we have talked about the Conor-Khabib fight. Kenny and I both think it's pretty close on paper. Conor McGregor is the guy that Kenny and I would pick to beat Khabib if we had to choose somebody in this top 10 to beat him. But Khabib Nurmagomedov, Kenny, was a minus 260 favorite against Tony Ferguson, right,
Yep.
who was coming back at plus 200 about 10 days ago when that fight was still on paper. Now, if you want to say it tightens up a little bit because Khabib wasn't able to finish Al Iaquinta as a minus 700 favorite, I'm not going to argue with you. But in my opinion, as I said, there isn't much shine off of this guy. You just set up exactly who he is. I still think he's not all that far removed from the Barboza performance, which to me proved him as the most dominant force in the game. I still think he's favored to beat Tony Ferguson, and I still think when he fights the opponent that he prepares for, he's still the 155-pounder that nobody in this top 15 wants to see on the other side of the bracket.
Yeah, and not only that, we're assuming he's going to fight that same way that he did against Al Iaquinta against someone else.
Great point.
You know what I mean? Like, styles make fights, so we can't say, oh, because he did this, that means he's going to try to stand up with Conor McGregor and utilize that jab.
Right.
It's ridiculous.
Right.
So, again, Khabib felt so comfortable in there against Al Iaquinta that he said, you know what, I feel comfortable of striking with this guy. I don't think he's a threat. I felt his power. He's not knocking me out. I've been in there with, he's wrestling 170-pounders, 185-pounders at AKA. He's sparring these guys repeatedly. He knows what power is. He knows what strength is. He knows how to measure his risk and reward in a fight. He's been doing this a very long time. He's 25 and 0. You know what I mean? So again, for Khabib, now let's talk about his jab. Let's break it down on a technical level. His jab was awesome. The jab wasn't the problem. It's what he was doing after the jab. That right hand was completely down. And after he was jabbing, he was dropping his hands. I think what he was doing, he wanted Al to come forward so he could hit the takedown. So again, this is Khabib Nurmagomedov. He knows exactly what he's doing. Does he have the best striking in the world? No, he doesn't. That's never been his strength, but he really hasn't needed it.
Right. He's never been knocked down in 26 pro fights, and so I know defensively, certainly there are things that a lot of people believe he can shore up and even just as simple as maybe raising his guard more consistently. But perhaps that's a byproduct of never having been knocked down. And once that happens, maybe he'll make some changes. But I thought you hit on a very important thing in terms of the evolution of an elite fighter, because you talk to any chief corner type about any elite fighter, and it's about sending a different fighter out every time. It's not about sending the same guy out there. Khabib's going southpaw training right now. Javier Mendez is looking at him like, what are you doing, man? It is a constant evolution, and hopefully Khabib can just stay active. He has mastered this weight cut now, and that is a very good thing. So hopefully we get Khabib at least once more here in 2018. When you're watching all of this happen, Conor McGregor throwing a dolly at a bus full of competing fighters, and Khabib Nurmagomedov linked to 5 different main event opponents. Are you missing the chaos, or are you sort of thinking, man, I don't envy those guys this week?
No, I didn't miss that chaos, and I was glad to not be a part of it, to be quite honest with you. The security at that building should be ashamed of themselves. That's pathetic. It could have been a lot worse. And when you look at instances that have taken place, even in the dear city of Las Vegas and what happened there just about a year ago, it could have been much worse, and it could have been with a much worse crowd. Obviously, I don't think Conor went there with plans to really hurt anybody significantly, but what he did was absolutely stupid. And I think this has been something that's been growing for a long time, and the UFC is reaping a little bit of what they sow. When you allow someone to live above the rules for so long and really write their own rules and do what they want, this is what's going to happen. And not saying that I knew it all, or that I could for anybody. It's a challenging situation, and I think that the best is they really need to learn from this. And for all of their events now, there needs to be better security. Those venues have got to be more responsible. UFC security can't handle everything. They do a good job with their own internal security, but how 30 people like that can rush somewhere, get in, and get to that part of the building while they're running around like animals,
scary,
is beyond me. And I just, I hope that this doesn't snowball. We've seen some athletes really just uproot and destroy their careers. The times that I've met Conor McGregor, he's actually been a respectful, hard-working, focused young man that I left each time I met him very impressed. And so I'm hoping that this was an incident where he really realizes, man, I went too far. I made a bad mistake, and that he controls himself because he's a phenomenal athlete. And I would hate to see this destroy that. And
Right.
more importantly than anything, Ray Borg and Michael Chiesa, I think Chiesa's going to be okay is what I'm hearing. But for Ray, you really hope that these guys can earn a living moving forward.
Right.
Because for a guy like Ray Borg, he's a young guy. He's devoted his whole life to martial arts. If he can no longer make a living do this, his compensation is drastically impacted for the rest of his life.
Right. And he's a guy who had a baby a couple weeks ago, and he's a guy who did fight for the UFC title at one point in his career. Multiple corneal abrasions, by the way, for Ray Borg. And I hope you know I don't intend to make light of all of this as I sort of group everything that happened during fight week together. But, Brian, you've been in some crazy, horrifying situations in your life. There were fighters and staff members on that bus who thought they were part of a terrorist attack.
Yeah, I mean, when you see that many people running, I'm sure, and for those guys too, you got to think their mindset. When you get off that scale, there's some relief, then there's anxiety, then there's excitement. The night before your fight is a little bit of a celebration before the battle. You got there, you put in a lot of hard work, and it's a time where the people closest to you sit down, you break bread, and you celebrate all of their support, because you have to be very selfish during those fight camps. And you thank all of them during that meal, and for that to happen during that time, when you're mentally in a different state, you're focusing on the contest in 24 hours. It's a hard time to have something like that happen, and it's a shame, because this forces this. It takes a step backward for the sport, and the timing's awful. Where I think I don't know where the UFC is with their negotiations in terms of their content, but I don't think that boosts the offer price.
Brian, you're running a big company now, and I'm sure you're going to have to make a lot of difficult decisions. What does the UFC do here with Conor McGregor? Because you're talking about a guy who brings in literally hundreds of millions of dollars for the company. If that was Brian Stan who smashed the windshield, or Kenny Florian who smashed the bus, we'd be out of there. We both know that. What do you do with Conor here?
Now, at the end of the day, and this is tough, right? At the end of the day, that business exists to generate revenue.
Yeah.
And right now, the number one revenue generator for that company is Conor McGregor. So I think that they will probably take a look at what are the athletic commissions going to do, and get a sense of that before they levy their own suspension. And knowing that he wanted to fight in the fall, they're going to want to start that clock as soon as humanly possible. It looks like he was only going to fight once this year. I could see them forcing him to pay some serious fines, him to have to pay, and there's probably going to be a civil lawsuit for the two fighters that were injured, and that's going to be ongoing. That's going to be problematic. There'll probably be a suspension of at least 6 months, which would still allow him to fight on a big card at the end of the year. And from there, there's got to be some apologies, and I think there's got to be some public service that's done as well to really see if this young man has been rehabilitated, and if there's underlying other root causes, if there's substances involved, then maybe there's rehab or whatever those things are. I don't know. I don't necessarily think there was substance involved. I think that this is a guy who wanted to make a statement, and a calculated move to generate some buzz around a fight went haywire. And if he'd have thrown that dolly lower and hit the body of the van, he'd be paying for some dents, and he'd be reimbursing the driver for that new van instead of what's taking place. But I think at the minimum, the UFC has to look at that. On the maximum, they're going to have to suspend him for a year. And they've got to ask themselves with their financial projections, does that mean they've got to lay? I don't know what their books say. I don't know if they have to lay people off if they continue on the current revenue generation. Dana says the books are fine. So if the books are fine and they're good financially, then they could survive a year-long suspension of Conor McGregor for terrible athletic conduct.
There was another superstar in the UFC who was getting into a lot of trouble as well. He was young. He became a millionaire very quickly. John Jones. Is this as bad as the stuff that John Jones has done, you think?
No, it's not. It's bad. Don't get me wrong, but when you hit people with your vehicle and you run from the scene, that's bad because you have no idea how much you hurt them. I'm not saying what Conor did. It's very close, right? He got very lucky. He could have caused, and he may have caused me to have permanent eye damage, but that glass could have done quite a bit worse.
Yep.
And so he got lucky. John got lucky. And again, I think it's two young men who, at one point or another, when I met them, when they were young, were good people. I left with good opinions of them. And now it's a crossroads. They've got a choice to make. John, I think, is making his choices, but Conor sits at that crossroads right now. And look, we've seen this happen with so many athletes over the years, right? When they make it so fast, they just can't deal with the fame. And Dana's seen it a million times. And I think that, if anything, when you get stars like this, what can the UFC do to protect their investment? I think that other professional sports have different outlets. Professional NFL teams have all kinds of things that maybe aren't publicly known that they do to keep an eye on their stars who exhibit those kinds of behaviors that may just, go rogue at times and do crazy things. So that may be something where the UFC has to take a look at that.
Brian, stand with us here on the Anakin Florian podcast, and I do want to segue to the fights, Bri, but I just want to say in closing on Conor McGregor's legal picture, I was going to book an attorney today, but I honestly didn't want to bog down the entire show. But so for Ray Borg, right, like Joey Coco Diaz said, Ray Borg's probably going to have 3 attorneys showing up at his hotel room door in Brooklyn, New York to potentially try to maximize this thing, right? Like, this is a guy who has fought for the world title. If he can't fight again or resume that career, I mean, are you talking about Ray Borg potentially, turning this into it's a hard question, but like a career-ending thing to try to make $5 or $6 million bucks? I mean, this is an Albuquerque, New Mexico-born fighter's fighter who wants to fight again.
Yeah, he absolutely wants to fight again, but at the same time, now he's got a child, and right. That means there's another adult, his partner in life, that's involved. And if a doctor looks and tells him that if you continue to fight, you can lose your eyesight. Right? One of his coaches, Mike Winklejohn, lost his eyesight from getting kicked in the eye. And so Ray Borg is going to want to see his child grow up. His family is going to be more important. When you have a child, it changes you. And Kenny can attest to this now. Fighting is easier when you don't have a family to worry about. And you could just be primal and you could just be a fighter. Things have changed for Ray Borg. So I'm not sure what decision he's going to make. The Ray Borg that I knew is the type of guy who's probably going to want to fight through anything. But at the same time now, if this is going to affect him, he can't see clearly, he runs risk of losing eyesight long term, then he's got a real case against Conor McGregor. And that kind of money, if it's $5 or $6 million, that's not all that much to Conor right now. It's not.
Right.